War between Four Walls, Part 1. The insurgents, under the eye of Enjolras, for Marius no longer looked to anything, turned the night to advantage. The barricade was not only repaired but made larger. They raised it 2 feet. Iron bars planted in the paving stones resembled lances in rest. All sorts of rubbish added and bought from all sides increased the exterior intricacy. The redoubt was skilfully made over into a wall within and a thicket without. They rebuilt the stairway of paving stones, which permitted ascent, as upon a citadel wall. They put the barricade in order, cleared up the basement room, took the kitchen for a hospital, completed the dressing of the wounds, gathered up the powder scattered over the floor and the tables, cast bullets, made cartridges, scraped lint, distributed the arms of the fallen, cleaned the interior of the redoubt, picked up the fragments, carried away the corpses. They deposited the dead in a heap in the little rue Montour, of which they were still masters. The pavement was red for a long time at that spot. Among the dead were 4 National Guards of the banlieue. Enjolras had their uniforms laid aside. The 3 women took advantage of the night's respite to disappear finally, which made the insurgents breathe more freely. They found refuge in some neighboring house. Day was beginning to dawn. They had just extinguished the torch which had been replaced in its socket of paving stones. The interior of the barricade, that little court taken in on the street, was drowned in darkness and seemed, through the dim twilight horror, the deck of a disabled ship. The combatants going back and forth moved about in it like black forms. Above this frightful nest of shadow, the stories of the mute houses were lividly outlined. At the very top the wan chimneys appeared. The sky had that charming undecided hue which is perhaps white and perhaps blue. Some birds were flying with joyful notes. The tall house, which formed the rear of the barricade, being toward the east, had a rosy reflection upon its roof. At the window of the 3rd story, the morning breeze played with the grey hairs of the dead man's head. Enjolras had gone to make a reconnaissance. He went out by the little rue Montour, creeping along by the houses. The insurgents, we must say, were full of hope. With that facility for triumphant prophecy, which is a part of the strength of the fighting Frenchmen, they divided into 3 distinct phases the day which was opening. At 6 o'clock in the morning, a regiment, which had been labored with, would come over. At noon, insurrection of all Paris. At sundown, revolution. Enjolras reappeared. He returned from his gloomy eagle's walk in the obscurity without. He listened for a moment to all this joy with folded arms, one hand over his mouth. Then, fresh and rosy in the growing whiteness of the morning, he said, "The whole army of Paris fights. A third of that army is pressing upon the barricade in which you are. You will be attacked in an hour. As for the people, they were boiling yesterday, but this morning they do not stir. Nothing to expect, nothing to hope. No more from a faubourg than from a regiment. You are abandoned." These words fell upon the buzzing of the groups, and wrought the effect which the first drops of the tempest produce upon the swarm. All were dumb. There was a moment of inexpressible silence, when you might have heard the flight of death. This moment was short. A voice from the most obscure depths of the groups cried to Enjolras, "So be it! Let us make the barricade 20 feet high, and let us all stand by it. Citizens, let us offer the protest of corpses. Let us show that if the people abandon the Republicans do not abandon the people." These words relieved the minds of all from the painful cloud of personal anxieties. They were greeted by an enthusiastic acclamation. The name of the man who thus spoke was never known. It was some obscure blouse-wearer, an unknown, a forgotten man, a passing hero, that great anonymous always found in human crises and in social births, who at the proper instant speaks the decisive word supremely, and who vanishes into the darkness after having for a moment represented, in the light of a flash, the people and God. Part 2. After the man of the people, who decreed the protest of corpses, had spoken, and given the formula of the common soul, from all lips arose a strangely satisfied and terrible cry, funereal in meaning and triumphant in tone. "Long live death! Let us all stay!" "Why all?" said Enjolras. "All! All!" Enjolras resumed. "The position is good. The barricade is fine. 30 men are enough. Why sacrifice 40? They replied, "Because nobody wants to go away." Chief to his fingertips, Enjolras, seeing they murmured, insisted. He resumed haughtily, "Let those who fear to be of one of but 30 say so." The murmurs redoubled. "Besides," observed a voice from one of the groups, "to go away is easily said. The barricade is hemmed in." Enjolras, without answering, touched Combeferre's shoulder, and they both went into the basement room. They came back a moment afterward. Enjolras held in his hands the 4 uniforms which he had reserved. Combeferre followed him, bringing the crossbelts and shakos. "With this uniform," said Enjolras, "you can mingle with the ranks and escape. Here are enough for 4." And he threw the 4 uniforms upon the unpaved ground. No wavering in the stoical auditory. "There are among you some who have families. Mothers, sisters, wives, children. Let those leave the ranks." Then those heroic men began to inform against each other. "That is true," said a young man to a middle-aged man. "You're the father of a family. Go away." "It is you, rather," answered the man. "You have 2 sisters whom you support." And an unparalleled conflict broke out. It was as to which should not allow himself to be laid at the door of the tomb. "Citizens," continued Enjolras, "this is the Republic, and universal suffrage reigns. Designate yourselves those who ought to go." They obeyed. In a few minutes 5 were unanimously designated, and left the ranks. "There are 5!" exclaimed Marius. There were only 4 uniforms. "Well," resumed the 5, "one must stay." At this moment a 5th uniform dropped, as if from heaven, upon the 4 others. The 5th man was saved. Marius raised his eyes and saw Monsieur Fauchelevent. Jean Valjean had just entered the barricade. Whether by information obtained or by an instinct, or by chance, he came by the little Rue Mondétour. Thanks to his National Guard dress, he had passed easily. The commotion was indescribable. "Who is this man?" asked Cosette. "He is," answered Combeferre, "a man who saves others." Marius added in a grave voice, "I know him." This assurance was enough for all. Enjolras turned toward Jean Valjean. "Citizen, you are welcome." And he added, "You know that we are going to die." Jean Valjean, without answering, helped the insurgent whom he saved to put on his uniform. Part 3. The situation of all, in this hour of death and in this inexorable place, found its resultant and summit in the supreme melancholy of Enjolras. Enjolras had within himself the plenitude of revolution. He was incomplete notwithstanding, as much as the absolute can be. He clung too much to Saint-Just, and not enough to anarchist Clootz. Still, in his mind, in the society of the friends of the ABC, it had at least received a certain polarization from the ideas of Combeferre. For some time he had been leaving little by little the narrow form of dogma, and allowing himself to tread the broad paths of progress, and he had come to accept, as its definitive and magnificent evolution, the transformation of the great French Republic into the immense human republic. As to the immediate means, in a condition of violence he wished them to be violent. In that he had not varied. He was still of that epic and formidable school which is summed up in this word, 93. Enjolras was standing on the paving stone steps, his elbow upon the muzzle of his carbine. He was thinking. He started, as at the passing of a gust. Places where death is have such tripodal effects. There came from his eyes, full of the interior sight, a kind of stifled fire. Suddenly he raised his head. His fair hair waved backward, like that of the angel upon its sombre car of stars. It was the mane of the startled lion, flaming with a halo, and exclaimed, "Citizens, do you picture to yourselves the future? The streets of the cities flooded with light, green branches upon the thresholds, the nation's sisters, men just, the old men blessing the children, the past loving the present, thinkers in full liberty, believers in full equality. For religion, the heavens, God, priest direct, human conscience become the altar. No more hatred, the fraternity of the workshop and the school, for reward and for penalty notoriety, to all labor, for all law, over all peace, no more bloodshed, no more war, mothers happy. To subdue matter is the first step, to realize the ideal is the second. Reflect upon what progress is already done. Once the early human races looked with terror upon the hydra which blew upon the waters, the dragon which vomited fire, the griffin, monster of the air, which flew with the wings of an eagle and the claws of a tiger. Fearful animals which were above man. Man, however, has laid his snares, the sacred snares of intelligence, and has at last caught the monsters. We have tamed the hydra, and he is called the steamer. We have tamed the dragon, and he is called the locomotive. We are on the point of taming the griffin. We have him already, and he is called the balloon. The day when this Promethean work shall be finished, and when man shall have definitely harnessed to his will the triple chimera of the ancients, the hydra, the dragon, and the griffin, he will be the master of the water, the fire, and the air, and he will be to the rest of the animated creation what the ancient gods were formerly to him. Courage and forward. Citizens, where are we tending? To science-made government, to the force of things recognized as the only public force, to the natural law having its sanction and its penalty in itself, and promulgated by its self-evidence to a dawn of truth, corresponding with the dawn of the day. We are tending toward the union of the peoples. We are tending toward the unity of man. No more factions, no more parasites. The real governed by the true, such is the aim. Civilization will hold its courts on the summits of Europe, and later, at the center of the continents in a grand parliament of intelligence. Something like this has been seen already. The Amphictyons had 2 sessions a year, one at Delphi, place of the gods, the other at Thermopylae, place of the heroes. Europe will have her Amphictyons. The globe will have its Amphictyons. France bears within her the sublime future. This is the gestation of the 19th century. That which was sketched by Greece is worth being finished by France. Listen to me then. Foy, valiant working man, man of the people, man of the peoples, I venerate thee. Yes, thou seest clearly future ages. Yes, thou art right. Thou hadst neither father nor mother. Foy, thou hast adopted humanity for thy mother, and the right for thy father. Thou art going to die here, that is, to triumph. Citizens, whatever may happen today, through our defeat, as well as through our victory, we are going to effect a revolution. Just as conflagrations light up the whole city, revolutions light up the human race. And what revolution shall we effect? I have just said, the revolution of the true. From the political point of view, there is but one single principle, the sovereignty of man over himself. This sovereignty of myself over myself is called liberty. When 2 or several of these sovereignties associate, the state begins. But in this association there is no abdication. Each sovereignty gives up a certain portion of itself to form the common right. That portion is the same for all. This identity of concession, which each makes to all, is equality. The common right is nothing more or less than the protection of all radiating upon the right of each. This protection of all over each is called fraternity. The point of intersection of these aggregated sovereignties is called society. This intersection being a function, this point is a knot. Hence what is called the social tie. Some day, social contract, which is the same thing. The word contract being etymologically formed with the idea of tie. Let us understand each other in regard to equality. For, if liberty is the summit, equality is the base. Equality, citizens, is not all vegetation on a level, a society of big spears of grass and of little oaks, a neighborhood of jealousies emasculating each other. It is civilly all aptitudes having equal opportunity, politically all votes having equal weight, religiously all consciences having equal rights. Equality has an organ, gratuitous and obligatory instruction. The right to the alphabet, we must begin by that. The primary school obligatory upon all, the higher school offered to all, such is the law. From the identical school springs equal society, yes, instruction, light, light. All comes from light and all returns to it. Citizens, the 19th century is grand, but the 20th century will be happy. Then there will be nothing more like old history. Men will no longer have to fear, as now, a conquest, an invasion, a usurpation, a rivalry of nations with the armed hand, an interruption of civilization depending upon a marriage of kings, a birth in the hereditary tyrannies, a partition of the portions by a congress, a dismemberment by the downfall of a dynasty, a combat of 2 religions meeting head to head like 2 goats of darkness upon the bridge of the infinite. They will no longer have to fear famine, speculation, prostitution from distress, misery from lack of work, and the scaffold, and the sword, and the battle, and all the brigandages of chance in the forest of events. We might almost say that there will be no events more. Men will be happy. The human race will fulfill its law as the terrestrial globe fulfills its. Harmony will be re-established between the soul and the star. The soul will gravitate about the truth like the star about the light. Friends, the hour in which we live, and in which I speak to you, is a gloomy hour, but of such is the terrible price for the future. A revolution is a toll gate. Oh, the human race shall be delivered, uplifted and consoled. We affirm it on this barricade. Whence shall arise the shout of love, if it not be from the summit of sacrifice? Oh, my brothers, here is the place of junction between those who think and those who suffer. This barricade is made neither of paving stones, nor of timbers, nor of iron. It is made of 2 mounds, a mound of ideas and a mound of sorrows. Misery here encounters the ideal. Here day embraces night and says, I will die with thee, and thou shalt be born again with me. From the presence of all desolations, faith gushes forth. Sufferings bring their agony here, and ideas their immortality. This agony and this immortality are to mingle and compose our death. Brothers, he who dies here dies in the radiance of the future, and we are entering a grave, illuminated by the dawn. Enjolras broke off rather than ceased. His lips moved noiselessly, as if he were continuing to speak to himself, and they looked at him with attention, endeavouring still to hear. There was no applause, but they whispered for a long time. Speech being breath, the rustling of intellects resembles the rustling of leaves. Part 4. It was growing light rapidly, but not a window was opened, nor a door stood ajar. It was the dawn, not the hour of awakening. A mysterious movement was taking place at some distance. It was evident that the critical moment was at hand. As in the evening, the sentries were driven in, but this time all. Enjolras had piled up near the door of the wine shop some 30 paving stones. Torn up needlessly, said Bossuet. The silence was now so profound on the side from which the attack must come, that Enjolras made each man resume his post for combat. A ration of brandy was distributed to all. As on the evening before, the attention of all was turned, and we might almost say threw its weight upon the end of the street, now lighted and visible. They had not long to wait. Activity distinctly recommenced in the direction of Saint-Lô, but did not resemble the movement of the first attack. A rattle of chains, the menacing jolt of a mass, a clicking of brass bounding over the pavement, a sort of solemn uproar announced that an ominous body of iron was approaching. There was a shudder in the midst of those peaceful old streets, cut through and built up for the fruitful circulation of interests and ideas, and which were not made for the monstrous rumbling of the wheels of war. The stare of all the combatants upon the extremity of the street became wild. A piece of artillery appeared. The gunners pushed forth the piece. The smoke of the burning match was seen. "Fire!" cried Enjolras. The whole barricade flashed fire. The explosion was terrible. An avalanche of smoke covered and effaced the gun and the men. In a few seconds the cloud dissipated, and the cannon and the men reappeared. Those in charge of the piece placed it in position in front of the barricade, slowly, correctly, and without haste. Not a man had been touched. Then the gunner, bearing his weight on the breech, to elevate the range, began to point the cannon with the gravity of an astronomer adjusting a telescope. "Bravo for the gunners!" cried Bossuet, and the whole barricade clapped hands. "Reload arms," said Enjolras. How was the facing of the barricade going to behave under fire? Would that shot make a breach? That was the question. While the insurgents were reloading their muskets, the gunners loaded the cannon. There was intense anxiety into the redoubt. The gun went off. The detonation burst upon them. "Prison!" cried a cheerful voice. And at the same time as the cannonball, Gavroche tumbled into the barricade. He came by way of the Rue de Seine, and he had nimbly clambered over the minor barricade, which fronted upon the labyrinth of the Petite Truanderie. Gavroche produced more effect in the barricade than the ball. The ball lost itself in the jumble of the rubbish. At the very utmost, it broke a wheel of the omnibus and finished the old Anceau cart, seeing which the barricade began to laugh. "Proceed," cried Bossuet to the gunners. Part 5. Gavroche warned his comrades, as he called them, that the barricade was surrounded. He had had great difficulty in getting through. A battalion of the line, whose muskets were stacked in the Petite Truanderie, were operating the side of the Rue de Seine. On the opposite side, the municipal guard occupied the Rue de Prêcheurs. In front, they had the bulk of the army. This information given, Gavroche added, "I authorize you to give him a dose of pills." Meanwhile, Enjolras, on his battlement, was watching, listening with intense attention. The assailants, dissatisfied, doubtless, with the effect of their fire, had not repeated it. A company of infantry of the line had come in and occupied the extremity of the street in rear of the gun. The soldiers tore up the pavement, and with the stones constructed a little low wall, a sort of breastwork, which was hardly more than 18 inches high, and which fronted the barricade. At the corner, on the left of this breastwork, they saw the head of the column of a battalion of the banlieue, massed in the Rue Saint-Denis. Enjolras, on the watch, thought he distinguished the peculiar sound which is made when canisters of grape are taken from the caisson, and he saw the gunner change the aim and incline the piece slightly to the left. Then the cannoneers began to load. The gunner seized the linstock himself and brought it near the touch-hole. "Heads down! Keep close to the wall!" cried Enjolras. "And all on your knees, along the barricade!" The insurgents, who were scattered in front of the wine shop, and who had left their posts of combat on Gavroche's arrival, rushed pell-mell toward the barricade. But before Enjolras' order was executed, the discharge took place with the fearful rattle of grape shot. It was so, in fact. The charge was directed at the opening of the redoubt. It ricocheted upon the wall, and this terrible ricochet killed 2 men and wounded 3. If that continued, the barricade was no longer tenable. It was not proof against grape. There was a sound of consternation. "Let us prevent the second shot at any rate," said Enjolras. And, lowering his carbine, he aimed at the gunner, who at that moment, bending over the breech of the gun, was correcting and finally adjusting the aim. This gunner was a fine-looking sergeant of artillery, quite young, of fair complexion, with a very mild face, and the intelligent air peculiar to that predestined and formidable arm which, by perfecting itself in horror, must end in killing war. Combeferre, standing near Enjolras, looked at this young man. "What a pity," said Combeferre. "What a hideous thing these butcheries are. Come, when there are no more kings, there will be no more war. Enjolras, you are aiming at that sergeant, you are not looking at him. Just think that he is a charming young man. He is intrepid. You see that he is a thinker. These young artillerymen are well educated. He has a father, a mother, a family. He is in love, probably. He is at most 25 years old. He might be your brother." "He is." "Yes," said Combeferre. "And mine also. Well, don't let us kill him." "Let me alone. We must do what we must." And a tear rolled slowly down Enjolras' marble cheek. At the same time, he pressed the trigger of his carbine. The flash leapt forth. The artilleryman turned twice around, his arms stretched out before him, and his head raised as if to drink the air. Then he fell over on his side upon the gun and lay there motionless. His back could be seen, from the centre of which a stream of blood gushed upward. The ball had entered his breast and passed through his body. He was dead. It was necessary to carry him away and to replace him. It was indeed some minutes gained. Part 6. There was confusion in the council of the barricade. The gun was about to be fired again. They could not hold it out a quarter of an hour in that storm of grape. It was absolutely necessary to deaden the blows. Enjolras threw out his command. "We must put a mattress there." "We have none," said Combeferre. "The wounded are on them." Jean Valjean, seated apart on a block, at the corner of the wine-shop, his musket between his knees, had up to this moment taken no part in what was going on. He seemed not to hear the combatants about him say, "There's a musket which is doing nothing." At the order given by Enjolras, he got up. It will be remembered that on the arrival of the company in the Rue de la Chanvrerie, an old woman, foreseeing bullets, had put her mattress before her window. This window, a garret window, was on the roof of a house of 6 stories standing a little outside of the barricade. The mattress, placed crosswise, rested at the bottom upon 2 clothes poles, and was sustained above by 2 ropes which, in the distance, seemed like threads, and which were fastened to the nails driven into the window casing. These 2 ropes could be seen distinctly against the sky like hairs. "Can somebody lend me a double-barreled carbine?" said Jean Valjean. Enjolras, who had just reloaded his, handed it to him. Jean Valjean aimed at the window and fired. One of the 2 ropes of the mattress was cut. The mattress now hung only by 1 thread. Jean Valjean fired the second barrel. The second rope struck the glass of the window. The mattress slid down between the 2 poles and fell into the street. All cried, "There's a mattress!" "Yes," said Combeferre, "but who will go after it?" Jean Valjean went out at the opening, entered the street, passed through the storm of balls, and went to the mattress, picked it up, put it on his back, and returned to the barricade. He put the mattress into the opening himself. He fixed it against the wall in such a way that the artillerymen did not see it. This done, they awaited the charge of grape. They had not long to wait. The cannon vomited its package of shot with a roar, but there was no ricochet. The grape miscarried upon the mattress. The desired effect was obtained. The barricade was preserved. "Citizen," said Enjolras to Jean Valjean, "the Republic thanks you." Bossuet admired and laughed. He exclaimed, "It is immoral that a mattress should have so much power, triumph of that which yields over that which thunders. But it is all the same. Glory to the mattress which nullifies a cannon." Part 7. The fire of the assailants continued. The musketry and the grape alternated, without much damage indeed. The top of the façade of the Corinth alone suffered. The window of the first story and the dormer windows of the roof, riddled with shot and ball, were slowly demolished. The combatants who were posted there had to withdraw. Besides, this is the art of attacking barricades, to tease for a long time in order to exhaust the ammunition of the insurgents, if they commit the blunder of replying. When it is perceived, from the slackening of their fire, that they have no longer either balls or powder, the assault is made. Enjolras did not fall into this snare. The barricade did not reply. But a new personage had just entered upon the scene. It was a second piece of ordnance. The artilleryman quickly executed the manoeuvres, and placed the second piece in battery near the first. This suggested the conclusion. A few moments afterward, the two pieces rapidly served opened directly upon the redoubt. The platoon firing of the line and the banlieue supported the artillery. Another cannonade was heard at some distance. At the same time that two cannon were raging against the redoubt in the Rue de Chanvrerie, two other pieces of ordnance, pointed one on the Rue Saint-Denis, the other on the Rue Aubry de la Bouchée, were riddling the barricade Saint-Merry. The four cannon made dreary echo to one another. The bayings of the dismal dogs of war answered each other. Of the two pieces which were now battering the barricade in the Rue de la Chanvrerie, one fired grape, the other ball. The one which threw balls was elevated a little, and the range was calculated so that the ball struck the extreme edge of the upper ridge of the barricade, dismantled it, and crumbled the paving stones on the insurgents in showers. This peculiar aim was intended to drive the combatants from the summit of the redoubt, and to force them to crowd together in the interior. That is, it announced the assault. "We must at all events diminish the inconvenience of these pieces," said Enjolras, and he cried, "Fire upon the cannoneers!" All were ready. The barricade, which had been silent for a long time, opened fire desperately. 7 or 8 discharges succeeded each other with a sort of rage and joy. The street was filled with blinding smoke, and after a few minutes, through this haze pierced by flame, they could confusedly make out 2/3 of the cannoneers lying under the wheels of the guns. Those who remained standing continued to serve the pieces with rigid composure, but the fire was slackened. "This goes well," said Bossuet to Enjolras. "Success." Enjolras shook his head and answered, "A quarter of an hour more of this success, and there will be not 10 cartridges in the barricade." It would seem Gavroche heard this remark,